Imagine dedicating your life to protecting your younger brother, only to watch the woman he loves slowly destroy everything you've built. She smiles like an angel, but behind closed doors, her words cut like a knife. And on the day of the wedding, when all the masks fall away, one performance changes everything. This isn't just a wedding story. It's a story of betrayal, hidden truths, and a comeback you'll never forget.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about Harmony, a woman who sacrificed her own dreams to raise her brother, only to face the cruelty of the one person who was supposed to love him. If you've ever felt underestimated, betrayed, or forced to hide your true self, this story will hit hard. Make sure to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what you'd do if you were in Harmony's shoes.
Seattle has a way of wrapping you in its moods. The rain doesn't just fall, it lingers, soaks into the sidewalks, and makes the Puget Sound shimmer like a restless secret. For me, Harmony Evans, the city had always been both a cage and a canvas. At 32, I wasn't married, had no kids, and my life revolved around planning other people's perfect days. Wedding dresses, centerpieces, flower arrangements, and ensuring brides walked down the aisle without a single hiccup. That was my world. Some people might call it chaos, but I called it home. The truth, though, my life was never really about me. It had always been about my younger brother, Wesley. Wesley wasn't just my brother. He was my responsibility, my reason to keep breathing when the world threatens to crush us. I can still remember the night our lives changed forever. I was 16, Wesley only 13, when the phone call came. Our mom, our hardworking, unstoppable mom, had died in a car accident. One slick road, one foggy night, and a truck that didn't see her in time. I'll never forget standing in the hospital hallway, the sterile lights buzzing above me, while Wesley sat slumped in a plastic chair, staring at the floor. He didn't cry, not once. That silence broke me more than tears ever could. Our dad had disappeared years before, leaving only unpaid bills and broken promises. And just like that, it was me and Wesley against the world. I dropped my own dreams without hesitation. I was supposed to study music, supposed to chase a scholarship overseas. But instead, I picked up shifts at a diner, then a banquet hall, sometimes juggling 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. Rent, groceries, school supplies, it all fell on me. My dreams went into a box, locked away with sheet music I couldn't afford to play anymore. But Wesley, he was brilliant. He had that spark, sharp as a blade, with a grin that could charm even the grumpiest waitress at the diner. He worked hard, got a full scholarship to a top university, and later landed a cushy tech job in Seattle. Every time he called to share his wins, I felt like I'd run too. Every sacrifice, every night I'd gone without sleep, had been worth it. So when he told me he was getting married, I thought, finally we've made it through the storm. Her name was Everly. Just saying it out loud felt like it belonged in a storybook. Everly Pierce, daughter of a wealthy tech mogul, a Juilliard-trained violinist, beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who, at least on paper, seemed like she'd fill the hole in our family and give Wesley the love and stability he deserved. The first time I met her, it was a rainy afternoon at a waterfront restaurant in downtown Seattle, the kind of place with candlelit tables and a view of the Sound that made the city look like a painting. Everly was stunning in person. Tall, chestnut hair falling in waves, a smile that seemed to light up the room. Her parents were just as impressive, all warm handshakes and stories about her accomplishments. They spoke about her charity concerts, her national awards, her students who adored her. I sat there, in my simple blouse, a high school graduate in a room full of degrees and accolades. And for a moment, I felt small, but I pushed it aside. This was Wesley's day. He deserved this happiness. Everly mentioned you work at a wedding hall, her mom said to me, her voice smooth as honey. Could we have the wedding there? It would mean so much to have you involved.
I smiled, my heart swelling. Absolutely. It's a gorgeous venue. Waterfront, chandeliers, the works. I'd love to help make it perfect. Everly turned to me then, her eyes sparkling as she said, "That would be amazing, Harmony. Thank you." For a while, I thought it might be true. that she was as sweet as she appeared, that we were about to blend our lives into something whole and beautiful. But then it happened. I'd stepped outside to take a work call, the drizzle soaking into my jacket. As I hung up, I saw Everly coming back from the restroom. I smiled, ready to thank her for being so warm, so welcoming, but her face shifted in an instant. It was like watching a mask slip. "You're the high school graduate, right?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes scanning me like I was a stain on her designer dress. Yeah?" I said, caught off guard. She tilted her head, her lips curling. "Must be nice, playing assistant, while the rest of us actually achieve something." The words hit me like a punch. I froze, too stunned to respond. She didn't wait for an answer. She just brushed past me, her perfume lingering like poison in the rain. When I returned to the table, she was back to her radiant self, smiling as she handed me a menu. "Something sweet, Harmony?" she asked, her voice dripping with charm. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe I misheard. Maybe she was just nervous. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was off. That fleeting glimpse of venom was just the beginning. From that day on, I couldn't shake the unease. I wanted to believe in the fairy tale Wesme saw in her, but the cracks had started to show, and I knew, whether I admitted it or not, that Everly Pierce was about to turn our lives upside down. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who yell, who lash out. They're the ones who smile while twisting the knife. And Everly, she was already sharpening hers.
The weeks after that family dinner were a blur of swatches, seating charts, and vendor calls. As a wedding planner, this was my natural environment. Logistics, details, keeping chaos in check. But something about planning this wedding felt different. It wasn't just another client, it was Wesley, my little brother, my reason for breathing. His happiness was at stake, and I wanted everything to be flawless. Everly, of course, insisted on being involved in every decision. That should have made me happy. A bride invested in her big day was usually a good sign. But with Everly, there was always an edge, something sharp hiding behind her polished exterior. It started small. We were sitting in the banquet hall one morning, the Seattle skyline glittering through the windows, a pot of coffee between us. The task was simple: finalize the seating chart. I suggested placing Wesley's coworkers near the dance floor. "They're a lively bunch," I explained. "It'll keep the energy up during the reception." Everly leaned back in her chair, her lips twitching into a smirk. "That's cute, Harmony, but you wouldn't really get it, would you? You didn't go to college. You don't have the experience to know how these things work." Her tone was honeyed but laced with poison, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. I forced a smile and adjusted the chart, swallowing the insult. She made it sound like I was a child dabbling in a grown-up world. Another time, we were selecting floral arrangements. I recommended white roses with lavender accents, a timeless choice. Everly sighed dramatically, twirling a strand of her chestnut hair.
"Harmony, if you spent half as much time finding a husband as you do fussing over other people's weddings, maybe you wouldn't be so alone." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, wait, you only finished high school. That must really limit your options, doesn't it?" She laughed lightly, as though it were a harmless joke, but her eyes held a challenge. I wanted to snap back, to wipe that smug smile off her face, but every time I thought of Wesley, he adored her. His voice would light up whenever he spoke about her, describing her as kind, family-oriented, the woman who would make our family whole again. I couldn't bear to ruin that picture for him, so I bit my tongue, again and again. The problem wasn't just her words, it was the way she flaunted her accomplishments at every turn. "I was always the star of every competition," she said one afternoon while flipping through fabric samples. "Standing ovations, national recognition, not like you, slaving away at some dead-end job." She said it casually, as if she were discussing the weather. But each jab chipped away at me, piece by piece. What she didn't know, what I never told her, was that I wasn't just some dead-end wedding planner. Once I had been a pianist, a real one, good enough to win a scholarship to the London Conservatory, good enough to perform on stages most musicians only dream of. But when Mom died, my dreams died with her. someone had to step up for Wesley, and that someone was me. I traded ivory keys for diner trays and banquet schedules. Music became a ghost I carried in silence.
I never told Everly any of this. She didn't deserve to know. Besides, I didn't want to steal her spotlight. She craved it too much. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much she thrived on making me feel small. Every meeting, every coffee run, every late-night planning session left me raw, like sandpaper had been rubbed against my skin. And yet, I stayed quiet. For Wesley. Always for Wesley. But then came the whispers. It was the day before the wedding, and I was at the venue checking the sound system. Guests were already trickling into town, and the air buzzed with anticipation. I was adjusting a microphone when I heard voices drifting from the dressing room. "Did you know Everly's seeing someone else?" one of her friends whispered, her tone conspiratorial. My heart stopped. Some guy she met at a club. She says she's only marrying Wesley to keep her parents happy. The words sliced through me. I stood frozen behind the curtain, gripping the microphone cable so tightly my knuckles whitened. Poor Wesley, I thought. He had no idea. I wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. I needed proof. Something solid. I couldn't just go to Wesley with gossip on the eve of his wedding. It would destroy him. Still, the seed of dread had been planted, and it grew fast. The next morning, the venue was alive with flowers, lights, and the nervous laughter of bridesmaids. A Puget Sound sparkled outside, as though mocking the storm raging in my chest. I should have been focused on table settings, caterers, and the endless checklist that came with the job. Instead, I was drowning in unease. Everly looked radiant, of course. Lace gown, perfect makeup, her violin resting nearby like a crown jewel. Wesley couldn't stop grinning, his eyes shining with love. He had no idea the woman he adored was a ticking bomb. And then she did something that confirmed my worst fears. Mid-ceremony, Everly grabbed the microphone, her voice bright as she turned to the guests. "Let's have a special performance from Wesley's sister, Harmony, on the piano." The room gasped. My heart plummeted. I hadn't played in years. Hardly anyone in Seattle even knew I could. And I certainly hadn't told Everly. But the way she looked at me, the smug tilt of her chin, the cruel glint in her eyes, I realized she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't honoring me. She was setting me up to fail. And as the staff rolled out the grand piano, gleaming under the chandeliers, I knew one thing for certain. Everly wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. The murmur of the crowd filled the banquet hall like a wave crashing against the walls. Guests turned their heads, faces alight with curiosity and expectation. A spotlight hit the grand piano that staff had rolled center stage, its polished black surface gleaming under the chandeliers. My breath caught in my throat, my palms slick with sweat. This wasn't supposed to happen. I hadn't touched a piano in years. My music, the very thing that had once defined me, was locked away, buried with the sacrifices I'd made for Wesley. Playing wasn't just a performance. It was a piece of my soul I'd sealed shut. And Everly? She was prying it open, not to honor me, but to humiliate me. I glanced at her, standing radiant in her lace gown, her smile stretched just a little too wide. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking at me. Her eyes glittered with malice, daring me to falter, to prove her cruel narrative right. "Go on, Harmony," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the mic. "Show us what a high school grad can do." Her words pierced sharper than any blade. I felt the guests' eyes on me. Wesley's co-workers, Everly's polished family, friends I barely knew. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. I wanted to run, to disappear, but then her grip tightened around my arm as she leaned close, her whisper a venomous hiss only I could hear. "When I look at you, I just want to make you squirm," she said, her tone laced with glee. "You're nothing but a dropout. Play, or I tell Daddy to ruin Wesley's job. And by the way, I've got someone else. Wesley's just a pawn. Your call."
Her confession knocked the air out of me. The gossip I'd overheard confirmed. My chest burned, not from fear, but from rage. She wasn't just cruel to me, she was betraying Wesley, using him like a bargaining chip. I sank onto the piano bench, my hands trembling. The guests were whispering now, impatient, curious. Everly stood poised, victorious, as if she had already won. But something shifted inside me. She thought this was my breaking point, but she had no idea who I was or what I had once been. My fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain for only a moment. Then instinct took over. I pressed down, the opening notes of Clair de Lune filling the hall like water spilling into silence. At first, the melody was soft, hesitant, like a memory resurfacing. But as I played, something inside me cracked open. My hands remembered what my heart had tried to forget. The notes flowed faster, bolder, swelling into a storm that silenced the whispers and drew every gaze to me. The music was more than a performance. It was my story of sacrifice, of loss, of love. Every note was a piece of myself I had buried, now blazing back into the world. The banquet hall held its breath. Guests leaned forward, their champagne glasses forgotten. Even the servers froze mid-step, entranced. When the last note lingered in the air, silence followed. Then an eruption of applause that shook the walls. People stood, clapping, whistling, some even wiping away tears. I rose slowly, my chest heaving, my fingers still tingling with adrenaline. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. But Everly, her face was pale, her smile fractured. She hadn't expected this. She had set the stage for my humiliation, only to hand me the spotlight. Wesley beamed from the altar, his pride shining like a beacon. He clapped the loudest, his grin wide as if he'd just discovered a new piece of me. "That was incredible harmony," he shouted, his voice carrying above the crowd. But then, the twist I never saw coming. One of Everly's friends gasped loudly, pointing at me. "Is that Harmony Evans?" she said, her voice trembling with recognition. "The pianist from the London Conservatory? She was unbeatable in competitions." The room buzzed with whispers. Heads turned back and forth between me and Everly. Everly's eyes widened, her mask slipping further. "What?" she stammered, her composure unraveling. I straightened my shoulders, my voice calm but steady. "Yes, that's me. I studied in London until I came home for Wesley. I didn't tell you, Everly, because I didn't want to steal your spotlight, but you forced my hand." Gasps rippled through the hall. Another guest leaned in, whispering loud enough for others to hear. Wait, Everly's rival? The one she could never beat? It was Harmony? The realization spread like wildfire. Guests murmured, piecing together the puzzle. Everly's endless bragging, her obsession with being number one, it all crumbled under the truth. Everly's face drained of color. She looked at me like I'd ripped away her crown. Her hand trembled as she tried to raise the mic, but her words caught in her throat. "She's lying," she finally screamed, her voice too shrill, too desperate. "She's just trying to ruin my day." But the crowd wasn't convinced. My performance, my past, the recognition, it was undeniable. The once perfect bride now stood exposed, her mask in tatters. Wesley turned to her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Everly, what is she talking about?" She opened her mouth, scrambling for an excuse. But I was already reaching into my pocket, my phone, my lifeline, a habit from years of tricky clients. Always record conversations when things felt off. My thumb hit play, and Everly's voice rang out across the hall, her venom captured in digital clarity. "I'm only marrying Wesley because my parents wouldn't shut up about it. I've got a real boyfriend on the side. If you don't play, I'll cry to my dad, and Wesley's out of a job." The room froze. Gasps echoed. Everly's parents stiffened in their seats, their faces pale. The Wesleys' jaw tightened.
his eyes hardening as the weight of truth crashed down on him. "No!" Everly shrieked, lunging toward me. "She faked it. It's not real." But the damage was done. The guests had heard her. Wesley had heard her. The father she so desperately wanted to impress had heard her. And in that moment, the woman who had spent months cutting me down, belittling me, tormenting me in secret, stood exposed, her empire of lies collapsing under the weight of her own words. The wedding wasn't just on the brink of ruin, it was already burning.
The hall was no longer buzzing with celebration. It was a storm, thick with shock, gasps, and the weight of betrayal echoing in every corner. The chandeliers glittered above us like indifferent witnesses, their light spilling onto a scene that felt more like a courtroom than a wedding. Everly stood in the center, her lace gown clinging to her like a costume she no longer fit into. Her chestnut curls framed a face that had gone ghostly pale, her smile gone, replaced by a raw panic she couldn't mask. The microphone in her trembling hands was useless now. Her own recorded words had already spoken louder than anything she could say. Wesley stepped forward, his face a storm of disbelief and fury. He'd been glowing just minutes before, proud, in love, ready to promise forever. Now his shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp as knives. "Is this true, Everly?" His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that cut deeper than a shout. Everly's lips parted, but no words came. She looked from Wesley to the crowd, then back to him, her eyes desperate. "Wesley, you have to believe me. She's twisting things. She wants to ruin us." She jabbed a manicured finger at me, her voice pitching higher, almost hysterical. But the recording still hung in the air, undeniable, like a ghost she couldn't banish. Everly's father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. His face was crimson, his hand trembling as he pointed at her. "You disgrace us, Everly. You've humiliated this family. We raised you better than this."
Her mother covered her mouth with a handkerchief, tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't even look at her daughter. "No, Daddy, please!" Everly's voice cracked as she tried to reach for him, but he stepped back, his jaw set like stone. "You're no daughter of mine." The guests gasped again, some clutching their pearls, others shaking their heads, murmuring about the scandal unraveling before their eyes. Everly's carefully constructed world was crumbling faster than she could patch it together. She whirled toward Wesley, her voice breaking. "Please, baby, listen to me. I didn't mean it. I was just stressed about the wedding, that's all. You know how much I love you." But Wesley's eyes didn't soften. They darkened. He glanced at me, his face lined with guilt and realization. "Harmony, why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Because I didn't want to break your heart, Wesley. You were so in love, so sure of her. I thought I could handle it, keep it together for you. But when I overheard her friends yesterday, I knew something was wrong, and tonight she gave me no choice." His hand clenched into a fist at his side, his whole body taut with the weight of betrayal. "All this time, all those nights, I believed she was the one." Everly dropped to her knees, clutching the hem of his suit, her tears dripping onto the polished floor. "Please, Wesley, don't do this. Don't leave me. I'll change. I'll do better. Just give me another chance." Her voice was raw, guttural, a desperate plea that echoed through the silent hall. Wesley stepped back, forcing her hands from him. His voice was steady but cold. "We're done, Everly. I can't marry someone who lies to me, who manipulates my sister, who doesn't love me." He shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't deserve this ring. You never did." He pulled the engagement ring from her finger, his hands firm despite her sobs, and let it drop to the floor with a hollow clink. The sound rang louder than the applause had earlier, louder than the gasps, louder than her cries. It was final. Everly collapsed, her sobs racking her body as mascara streaked down her face. Please, she begged, reaching for him again, but no one moved to help her. Not her parents, not her friends, not even the guests who once admired her. They all stared, some with pity, some with judgment, as her mask shattered completely. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me pitied her, the girl who had everything but still needed to destroy others to feel whole, but another part of me felt a grim satisfaction. For months, she had belittled me, mocked me, threatened me, and now, in front of everyone, her cruelty had been laid bare. Wesley turned to me, his face softer now, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Harmony. I should have seen it. You've carried this alone for too long. Tears stung my eyes as I shook my head. You were in love. I didn't want to take that from you, but I couldn't let her keep hurting you or me. He pulled me into an embrace, his arms tight, his body trembling with grief and gratitude. You saved me, he whispered. The guests began to shuffle awkwardly, murmuring as they left the hall. Some cast sympathetic looks at Wesley, others avoided Everly's broken figure altogether. The dream wedding was over, replaced by silence, shame, and the aftermath of truth. Everly's relatives ushered her away, her sobs echoing down the corridor, her pleas ignored. The once celebrated violinist, the fairy tale bride, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered about over dinner tables. When the hall was nearly empty, Wesley and I sat together on the edge of the stage, the grand piano looming behind us like a guardian of secrets. Half-eaten hors d'oeuvres and wilting flowers surrounded us, remnants of a celebration that never was. He stared at the floor, his voice low. What do I do now? I squeezed his hand. You live, Wesley. You move forward. You remember that she didn't define you. You define you. For the first time since the storm began, his lips curved into a faint smile, and as the Puget Sound outside grew darker under heavy clouds, I realized something important. Tonight wasn't just about Everly's downfall. It was about us, about reclaiming the pieces of ourselves we had buried under sacrifice and betrayal. The wedding had collapsed, but maybe, just maybe, our lives were about to be rebuilt. The wedding that wasn't became the talk of Seattle overnight. By the next morning, whispers had turned into rumors, and rumors into headlines in certain social circles. The Pierce family name, once synonymous with prestige and elegance, was dragged through the mud. And at the center of it all was Everly, once the golden girl of Juilliard, now a scandal whispered about over cappuccinos in upscale cafes and dissected in hushed tones at charity galas. I should have felt mimicated. For months, she had chipped away at me, belittled me, and mocked my sacrifices. Exposing her lies should have been sweet revenge. And in a way, it was. But sitting in my small apartment the night after the wedding, the applause and gasps still echoing in my head, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Wesley had stayed with me after the chaos, crashing on my couch like we were kids again after a nightmare. He hadn't said much that night, just sat quietly with a beer in hand, staring at the muted glow of the TV while I folded away the leftover linens from the venue. Around midnight, he finally spoke. I feel like a fool. I set the linens aside and sat across from him. You're not a fool, Wesley. You were in love. That's not foolish. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. She played me, used me, and I didn't see it. You did, and I ignored it. His eyes lifted to mine, guilt etched deep. I should have listened to you. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. You couldn't have known. She was good at pretending. You weren't blind, you were just hopeful. There's nothing wrong with that. He didn't reply, but the tension in his shoulders eased just a little. By the end of the week, Seattle's elite had turned their backs on Everly. Her parents, furious and humiliated, cut her off financially. Without their wealth propping her up, the shiny veneer of her success began to peel. Her violin lessons dried up, her once coveted performances were canceled, and the friends who had once trailed her like shadows stopped answering her calls. I heard through the grapevines she'd taken a job at a local coffee shop. Her designer dresses traded for an apron and a name tag. The man she'd been seeing on the side, gone the moment her bank account shrank. I didn't gloat, not really. It wasn't joy I felt when I thought of her downfall. It was something closer to relief. The storm she had brought into our lives had finally passed, leaving only the wreckage behind. But what surprised me most wasn't Everly's collapse. It was what rose in me from the ashes.
A few days after the wedding, I got a call from one of the guests, a bride whose ceremony I had planned a year earlier. "Harmony," she said breathlessly, "I had no idea you played piano like that. It was magical. Would you consider performing at our anniversary party next month?" I froze. The phone pressed against my ear, my heart racing. Play again? In public? The thought terrified me, but at the same time, something inside me stirred. A part of me I thought I had buried for good. I said yes. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, couples planning weddings began requesting me, not only as a planner, but also as a pianist. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I could balance both. But the moment I sat at the keys again, the music flowed through me like it had been waiting all these years, patient and undiminished. I started small. Ceremonies, receptions, intimate gatherings, but each performance lit a fire in me. The applause, the way music transformed a room. It reminded me of the girl I once was, the one who dreamed of concert halls before life forced her to trade dreams for survival. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Wesley, too, began to heal. He threw himself into his tech projects, long nights at the office turning into promotions and recognition. His name started appearing in industry blogs, hailed as a rising star. We spent evenings together, sometimes ordering pizza, sometimes just sitting on my balcony overlooking the city. He'd talk about new opportunities, new dreams. And each time, his voice grew lighter, freer. "I'm gonna be okay," he told me one evening, leaning back in his chair with a rare, easy smile. "Thanks to you." I believed him. Wesley had always been stronger than he realized. He just needed reminding. But for me, the shift was more personal. For years, I had dimmed my own light for the sake of others, for Wesley, for Mom's memory, for the fear of outshining those around me. Everly's cruelty had forced me to confront the truth. I had been hiding not because I wasn't capable, but because I was afraid of what it meant to stand out again. Her attempts to break me had done the opposite. They had reignited a fire I thought was gone forever. One evening, after a small wedding where I had both planned and performed, I sat alone at the grand piano, the room empty except for the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. My fingers lingered on the keys, the final note still vibrating through the air. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was borrowing my past. I felt like I was reclaiming it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Everly had tried to use music to humiliate me, to strip me of dignity. Instead, she had given me back the very thing I thought I'd lost forever. Seattle would keep buzzing with its gossip. People would keep whispering about the scandal at the wedding that never was. But I knew the truth. The real story wasn't about Everly's downfall. It was about my rebirth.
Seattle has a short memory for scandals, but it has a long appetite for gossip. For weeks after the wreck of Wesley's wedding, the story lingered in conversations like the aftertaste of strong coffee. Everyone had an opinion on Everly, on her family, on me. Some painted me as the quiet heroine who saved my brother from disaster. Others whispered that I had stolen Everly's spotlight on purpose, that the performance was too perfect, too timed. But no matter the angle, one truth remained. Everly Pierce had fallen, and she had no one to blame but herself. I caught glimpses of her from time to time. Seattle wasn't a massive city, and her family's circle overlapped with mine more often than I liked. The first time, I saw her behind the counter at a downtown coffee shop, her once impeccable manicure chipped, her smile strained. She wore a green apron instead of a concert gown, her hair pulled into a messy bun. The customers barely glanced at her, treating her like she was invisible. I should have looked away, but I didn't. She caught my eye for a split second, and in that moment, I saw everything. Anger, shame, and something I almost mistook for desperation. She turned quickly, pretending to refill a pastry case, but I knew she'd seen me. Part of me pitied her. The fall from grace had been brutal. She had spent her entire life being told she was exceptional, that she deserved the spotlight, that she was untouchable. Now, stripped of money, recognition, and support, she was just another struggling 20-something, trying to scrape by in a city that chews up pride and spits it out. But pity wasn't the same as forgiveness. Meanwhile, my world was shifting in ways I hadn't expected. The wedding that never happened had turned into an unlikely opportunity. Word of my piano performance spread faster than any marketing campaign ever could. Suddenly, couples wanted me not only as their planner, but as their performer. 2 in 1. One bride gushed during a consultation. You make everything perfect, and then you play. It's like a fairy tale. The money helped, of course. But it was more than that. Each performance gave me back a piece of myself I'd thought was lost forever. My fingers danced over the keys like they had been waiting all these years for a second chance. I wasn't just Harmony, the reliable wedding planner. I was Harmony Evans, the pianist. For the first time in my adult life, I felt whole. Wesley noticed it too. He'd stop by the venues where I played, sitting quietly in the back as his sister commanded the room. Afterward, he'd hug me, his smile brighter than I'd seen in years. "You've been hiding this from me," he teased one night as we walked home from a performance. "All those years, and I never knew just how good you were." I shrugged, trying to hide the flush in my cheeks. It wasn't hiding, it was surviving. He nodded slowly, his grin fading into something more thoughtful. "I get it, but Harmony, you don't have to survive anymore. You get to live now." His words stayed with me long after he said them. Everly, on the other hand, was unraveling. Through whispers and the occasional slip of gossip, I learned that her so-called real boyfriend had left her not long after the wedding disaster. Without her parents' money, her apartment in Capitol Hill became too expensive. She moved into a cramped studio, barely making rent with her barista paycheck. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who once looked down on me for slaving away at a dead-end job was now living the very life she had mocked. But her downfall wasn't just financial. Her reputation in the music world took a hit too. Parents pulled their children from her lessons, sponsors canceled her performances, and the violin that had once been her crown jewel collected dust. Seattle's elite had moved on, but she couldn't escape the shadow of her own actions. I thought I'd feel more satisfaction watching her crumble. After all, she had gone out of her way to humiliate me, to belittle me, to hurt Wesley. But when I passed that coffee shop a second time and saw her wiping down tables, her face pale and drawn, the satisfaction wasn't there, only clarity. Everly's cruelty had been born from insecurity, not strength. She had needed to break others to feel whole. And without her crown, without her stage, she was just another human being, flawed, fragile, and lost.
One evening, weeks after the failed wedding, Wesley and I sat on my balcony overlooking the city. The air was crisp, the skyline glittering against the dark waters of the Sound. He had just come back from a conference where he'd been a featured speaker, his tech career taking off faster than either of us had expected. "I keep waiting to feel angry," he admitted, sipping his beer. "At her, at myself, mostly I just feel free." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "That's because you are. She doesn't get to own your story anymore." He looked at me then, his eyes soft. "Neither does she own yours, Harmony. You've got your music back. Don't let it go this time." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I won't. Not again." The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, healing. In the months that followed, I found myself playing more often than I planned weddings. At first, it felt strange to shift roles, but the more I leaned into it, the more natural it became. Music had always been my first love, and now it was no longer a ghost haunting me. It was my future. One night, after a particularly moving performance, a guest approached me. She was the director of a local arts foundation. "Harmony," she said warmly, "we'd love for you to headline our spring concert series. It's time people hear your story and your music." I hesitated for a moment, the old fear creeping in, but then I remembered Everly, remembered how her attempt to break me had forced me to stand up tall again. I thought of Wesley, of the sacrifices, of the years I had buried myself for his sake, and I realized I was ready. The irony still made me laugh sometimes. Everly had tried to use music to destroy me. Instead, she had handed me the key to reclaiming myself. Her crown was shattered, but mine was finally being forged. Seattle had always been gray to me.
a city of drizzle and muted skies, a place where dreams felt heavy and the air carried the weight of responsibility. But now it looked different. Every time I walked past the waterfront, every time I sat at a piano bench under warm stage lights, the city seemed brighter, almost as if it were finally reflecting the light I had been too afraid to show. The spring concert series with the Arts Foundation became my turning point. I practiced for weeks, my apartment filled once again with the sound of scales, arpeggios, and fragments of music that spilled into the night. At first, my fingers were clumsy, stiff from years of neglect. But soon, muscle memory returned, and the music became effortless, like it had been waiting for me all along. Wesley would often stop by after work, listening quietly from the couch as I played. He never interrupted. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling. Not the forced smile of someone trying to cheer me up, but the kind of smile that came from pride. "You're alive when you play," he told me one evening, his voice low but firm. "It's like I'm seeing the real you for the first time." I swallowed hard because deep down I knew he was right. The night of the concert arrived. The auditorium wasn't massive, but it felt huge to me. Dozens of faces filled the seats, and as I peeked from behind the curtain, my hands shook. Old fears resurfaced. The fear of failure, of being seen, of taking up space I'd been conditioned to surrender. But then I spotted Wesley in the front row, his eyes steady, his hands folded in quiet encouragement. That was all I needed. When I sat at the grand piano and touched the keys, the fear dissolved. The music poured out of me, flowing through the hall like water through stone. Every note was a confession of love, of loss, of sacrifice, of resilience. By the time I finished, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous, their cheers echoing in my bones. I bowed, tears stinging my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt not just alive, but whole. Afterward, people crowded around me. Some were patrons, some musicians, some strangers who simply wanted to thank me. The director of the Arts Foundation hugged me tightly. "Harmony, you belong on a stage. Don't hide again." Her words hit deep. Don't hide again. Because hiding had been my default for so long. Ever since Mom died, ever since I chose responsibility over dreams, ever since I let fear dictate my place in the world, now I was done hiding. Meanwhile, Wesley was finding his own kind of rebirth. His career in tech skyrocketed. After the failed wedding, he poured himself into work, and it paid off. He was promoted twice in the span of 6 months. His projects gaining national recognition. Articles highlighted him as one of Seattle's brightest young innovators. But more than the accolades, I noticed a shift in him personally. He laughed more. He called me just to chat instead of burying himself in his relationship. He even started dating again, slowly, cautiously, but with a hope I hadn't seen him in since before Everly. One evening, over pizza at my place, he said, "I thought she broke me. But maybe she just cleared the way for something better." I raised my glass of soda in a mock toast. "To better." He clinked his glass against mine, his grin wide. "To better." But Everly still lingered, like a shadow at the edge of our lives. News traveled fast in this city. I heard whispers of her working double shifts at the coffee shop, her violin palmed off for rent money. The image of her weeping in a lace gown on the wedding stage was etched in too many minds to ever be forgotten. I bumped into her once on the street. She was carrying a paper bag of groceries, her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollow. She looked older, worn down by reality. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before: defeat. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then turned quickly and disappeared into the crowd. I didn't chase her. Whatever words she had, they were too late. My own life was blooming in ways I hadn't imagined. Performances became regular, my calendar filling with bookings. Some were small, intimate lettings where brides requested Claire de Lune because they'd heard the story. Others were larger concerts sponsored by the Arts Foundation. Each time I played, I thought of Mom, of how she used to sit at our tiny kitchen table, humming along as I practiced, of how she had told me, "Harmony, your music will carry you farther than you know." She had been right. It carried me through grief, through sacrifice, through humiliation. And now, It was carrying me into the future I thought I had lost. One night, after a particularly moving performance, I walked home alone along the waterfront. The city lights reflected in the Puget Sound, glittering like stars trapped in the waves. For years, I had seen those lights as a reminder of everything I'd given up. But now, they felt like a mirror of possibility, bright, endless, shimmering. I paused, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and whispered softly, "I'm back." And I meant it. The funny thing about downfall and rebirth is how closely they're intertwined. Everly had tried to break me by dragging me back into music against my will. Instead, she had unlocked the very thing that saved me. Her cruelty had become my catalyst. Her lies had become my liberation. And as I walked home, my footsteps steady against the rain-slicked pavement, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning.
The months after my first big concert passed in a whirlwind. What had once been occasional wedding gigs turned into full bookings at cultural events, art shows, and even local festivals. Each time I sat at a piano, the audience leaned in, waiting, listening, living the music with me. People started using words I hadn't heard in years. Prodigy, gifted, rising star. Words that once belonged to a younger version of me, a girl with endless ambition before tragedy clipped her wings. Now, they belong to me again. But success didn't erase the shadows of the past. It was a chilly autumn evening when I got a call from a journalist. She wanted to do a feature story, From Wedding Planner to Pianist, The Unexpected Journey of Harmony Evans. She'd heard about the failed wedding, the viral whispers, the scandal. "People want to know the truth," she said. "Your side of it. How you went from obscurity to headlines." I hesitated. Did I want to relive that day? Did I want to drag Everly's name through the mud again, even unintentionally? But then I thought of Wesley, of how he'd faced humiliation too. I realized the story wasn't just about Everly. It was about us, our resilience, our fight, our survival. So I agreed. The article came out a week later, accompanied by photos of me at the piano. Hair swept back, fingers poised over the keys. The journalist wrote not about scandal, but about sacrifice. How I had given up my dreams to raise my brother, only to find them again years later. The response shocked me. Messages poured in from strangers. Some were fellow musicians who had abandoned their art for survival. Others were siblings who had raised brothers or sisters after loss. And many were people who simply needed a reminder that it wasn't too late to reclaim their lives. For the first time, my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to others too. But while my life was rising, Wesley was still untangling himself from the wreckage Everly had left behind. One night, he came over, looking more worn than usual. We sat at the kitchen table, the city lights glowing through the window, a pizza cooling between us. "I saw her today," he said quietly. I froze, my slice halfway to my mouth. "Everly?" He nodded. "At the coffee shop near my office. She didn't see me, but God, Harmony, she looked broken." I didn't know what to say. She was wiping down tables, her hair pulled back, no makeup, and for a second, I didn't even recognize her. I thought about walking up, about asking her why, about, I don't know, closure, I guess. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice thick. But then I remembered what she said on that recording, that I was just a pawn, and I turned around and walked out. His eyes lifted to mine, searching. "Does that make me cruel?" I shook my head firmly. "No, Wesley, it makes you strong. You don't owe her closure. She made her choices. You're allowed to move on." He let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly. "I want to believe that. You don't need to believe it. You need to live it." Wesley's healing wasn't instant. There were nights when I caught him staring out the window, lost in thought. There were mornings when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. But slowly, piece by piece, he was rebuilding. His work gave him purpose, and the respect he earned in his field filled the void Everly had left. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe in love again. I noticed the way he talked about a colleague,
Mia. His voice softened when he said her name, and his eyes lit up when he described their conversations. She was smart, funny, kind. Everything Everly wasn't. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but I saw it, and I prayed that when he was ready, this time it would be real.
For me, the stage became my sanctuary. At one performance, I played Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, a piece I hadn't touched since London. As the final notes faded, the crowd erupted, and I saw something in their faces that I hadn't seen before. Not just admiration, but connection. Afterward, an older woman approached me, her hands trembling as she held mine. "I lost my husband last year," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But tonight, when you played, I felt him beside me again. Thank you." Her words gutted me in the best way. Music wasn't just about me reclaiming my past anymore. It was about giving others something too. Healing, memory, hope. And I realized this was my purpose. Everly's name still floated in the background of whispers. Some said she was trying to start over, teaching violin in small community centers. Others claimed she was drowning in bitterness, blaming everyone but herself. I didn't know which was true. I didn't care. She no longer defined me. The girl who once mocked me for being just a high school graduate had become irrelevant to my story, because my story was no longer about her. It was about the girl who rose from the ashes, who found her voice again through keys and chords, who stood tall in the light she had once been afraid to claim. One evening, Wesley and I walked along the waterfront, the city glittering behind us. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of salt and rain. "You ever think about what Mom would say if she saw us now?" he asked suddenly. I smiled, the ache of her absence softened by time. "I'd say she's proud. Proud of you, proud of me, proud we survived when it would have been easier to quit." He slipped an arm around my shoulders, his voice quiet. "I think she'd say you finally found your way back to the piano." Tears blurred my vision, but I laughed softly. "Yeah, I think she would." We walked in silence after that, but it wasn't heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the silence of healing, of hope, of love that had endured everything. By winter, my calendar was no longer just full. It was overflowing. What started as wedding gigs and local showcases had transformed into invitations from across the country. Arts foundations in Portland, San Francisco, and even New York wanted me to perform. Emails poured in from universities asking if I would give guest lectures about resilience and artistry. I almost laughed when I saw one headline in an online magazine: "The Phoenix Pianist. How Harmony Evans rose from sacrifice to stardom." A phoenix. That was me now. But it wasn't about fame. It was about something deeper. Every time I touched the keys, I felt my mother's spirit, my younger self's dreams, and the love I carried for Wesley. Music wasn't just performance anymore. It was healing. One evening after a concert in San Francisco, I returned to my hotel room to find my phone buzzing with messages. Wesley had been at one of my shows, live streaming it to his colleagues back in Seattle. His texts lit up the screen. "You killed it, Harm. Mom would have cried. So proud of you. Always." I clutched the phone to my chest, tears prickling my eyes. For years, I had lived for Wesley, given everything so he could thrive. Now, he was the one cheering me on, making sure I never doubted my worth again. But while my life was expanding, Wesley's was quietly changing too. Mia, the colleague I had suspected he liked, had become a bigger presence in his stories. At first, it was little things: her sharp wit during team meetings, the way she always brought him coffee without asking. Then it was dinners after work, long conversations about everything from coding to childhood fears. One night, over video call, he admitted it. "I think I like her, Harmony." I grinned, trying not to squeal. "You think?" He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck like a shy teenager. "Okay, fine. I know I like her, but I'm scared. What if I'm wrong again? What if she turns out like her?" I shook my head firmly. "Mia isn't Everly. Don't let the wrong person ruin your chance with the right one. Take it slow, be honest, and don't ignore your gut this time." He nodded, his eyes softer. "You always know what to say." "Big sister privilege," I teased. As Wesley's heart tentatively reopened, Everly's presence in our lives dwindled. I stopped hearing her name in whispers. The few times she appeared in gossip, it was fleeting. Someone spotted her working at a music store. Someone else mentioned she was living in a rundown apartment on the edge of town. The city that had once applauded her
no longer cared. And strangely, that was the closure I didn't know I needed. Her downfall didn't come from me. Not really. It came from her own choices, her own lies, her own inability to see that cruelty never wins in the long run. And as she faded, I rose. My biggest moment came when I was invited to perform at a national arts gala in New York City. The stage was massive, the audience filled with critics, patrons, and musicians from around the world. It terrified me, but I accepted. On the night of the gala, as I stepped onto the stage, my heart hammered in my chest. But then I remembered Wesley's words, "You're alive when you play." So I played, and when the final note hung in the air, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. The sound washed over me like a wave, and in that moment, I knew I had stepped fully into the life I was meant to live. After the gala, Wesley called me, his grin audible through the phone. "National news is talking about you. Do you get that, Harmony? You're not just Seattle's secret anymore. You're everywhere." I laughed, sinking into the hotel couch, exhausted but exhilarated. Everywhere is a little much. Let's start with here. But deep down, I knew he was right. A week later, I returned to Seattle for a smaller event, a wedding, ironically. The bride had specifically requested me both as planner and pianist. As I played her down the aisle, I caught sight of Wesley in the back, Mia by his side. She leaned into him, whispering something that made him smile in that soft, rare way. My chest warmed. This was what I had wanted all along, for him to find happiness, for me to reclaim mine. After the ceremony, Wesley and Mia approached me. She extended her hand, her eyes kind. "I've heard so much about you, Harmony. I'm glad we finally met." I shook her hand, feeling the sincerity radiating from her. No pretense, no malice, just kindness. As Wesley slipped his arm around her, I realized something important. He was free, truly free, and so was I. That night, as I sat at my piano at home, the city lights flickering outside my window, I thought about the journey, about the girl who once worked diner shifts to keep the lights on, about the young woman who buried her music for survival, about the sister who endured cruelty in silence for the sake of love, and about the woman who finally reclaimed it all. Everly had once sneered, asking me what a high school graduate could ever achieve. Now the answer filled the air with every note I played. Everything.
Life has a strange way of coming full circle. For years, my world had revolved around holding things together for others. Wesley, our broken family, the brides and grooms who trusted me to make their day perfect. I was the steady hand in the chaos, the quiet shadow in the background. But now, for the first time, my life was my own. And yet, even as I stepped into the light, I knew it wasn't just my story. It was ours, mine and Wesley's. Because without him, without the bond that had carried us through tragedy and betrayal, I would never have found the courage to stand tall again. By spring, Wesley and Mia were inseparable. I watched their relationship grow in the most ordinary, beautiful ways. He brought her flowers for no reason. She left little notes in his briefcase. They laughed together easily, without effort, without masks. One Sunday afternoon, he brought her to Mom's grave. I went with them, the three of us standing in the quiet cemetery under a sky streaked with gray and gold. Wesley placed fresh lilies at the headstone, his voice low but sure. "Mom, this is Mia. I think you'd like her. She's kind. She makes me feel safe, happy." My throat tightened as Mia squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. I knew then this wasn't Everly all over again. This was real. And for the first time in years, I felt the heavy ache of grief soften into something lighter. Peace. My own life continued to bloom. The New York Gala had opened doors I didn't even know existed. Invitations poured in from Europe, Paris, Vienna, London. The same London I had once dreamed of as a teenager. The same conservatory I had walked away from. Now, they wanted me back. It felt surreal standing in the same city I had once abandoned, walking past the concert halls I used to imagine myself performing in. But this time, I wasn't a hopeful girl chasing a dream. I was a woman who had lived,
who had sacrificed, who had fought and won. When I performed there, the applause was thunderous. But what stayed with me wasn't the ovation. It was the quiet moment afterward, when I sat alone backstage, whispering, "We made it, Mom." Seattle still held whispers of Everly, though they were quieter now, fading with each season. I learned she had moved to a smaller town, giving lessons at a community center. The once golden girl now lived in obscurity. Did I hate her? No. If anything, I pitied her. Not because she lost her wealth or her fame, but because she never understood what I had finally learned. That life isn't about applause or perfection. It's about truth, about love, about resilience. She had tried to destroy me with music, to make me small, but in the end, she had been the one to remind me of who I was. In some twisted way, I owed my rebirth to her cruelty, and that was the final irony. The last piece of the circle came one summer evening at a wedding I had both planned and performed at. As the final notes of Claire de Lune drifted into the air, I looked around the room, guests swaying, the bride and groom glowing, laughter filling the hall. Wesley stood at the back with Mia, his arm around her shoulders, his smile easy and free. He caught my eye, lifted his glass, and mouthed, "We're okay." And in that moment, I knew he was right. We were okay. Better than okay. Later that night, as the guests left and the staff packed up, I sat alone at the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys. The Puget Sound shimmered outside, its waves catching the light of the moon. I thought of all the versions of myself I had been: the grieving teenager, the overworked young woman, the invisible wedding planner, the humiliated sister, and then the pianist reborn. I had carried so much for so long. Now, I carried only music. As I played one last song for myself, a smile spread across my face. This wasn't the end of my story, not even close. It was just the beginning of a life I had finally claimed as my own. And if there was one lesson I wanted the world to take from it, it was this: no one, not grief, not betrayal, not cruelty, can dim a light that is meant to shine. Because in the end, the truth always plays louder than the lies. And my truth had finally found its melody. And that's how one woman turned years of sacrifice, pain, and betrayal into the most powerful moment of her life. Sometimes, the truth has a way of shining brighter than any mask. If this story made you cheer, cry, or even gave you goosebumps, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the most unforgettable battles are fought not with fists, but with truth and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and I'll see you in the next story.